Hi, this is Michael. Welcome to week 7. So we're getting closer to the end. To let you know how things are going to go from here on, you may have noticed on Canvas that there was a due date set for this Sunday for project number 3. That was incorrect. We're going to have 2 weeks more on this project, and then we're going to do the final. So there's 2 more projects to go. And indeed, what you'll find is that this is the culmination of everything that we've done. One thing I hope you've noticed and taken advantage of, and I know many of you have, is the iterative process, meaning you can come up with an idea, present it to me and others, and get feedback on whether naming conventions and or organization and or navigation feels right, feels intuitive, and makes some sense. So all of these exercises that we've done so far about our markup, our taxonomies, and this navigation exercise is all to start to fit into something that we could actually present to maybe someone who's a little bit less familiar with this world. So we're going to move into what's called wireframes. So 2 weeks for this wireframing exercise, and I'll give you some tips on what I'm looking for this week for the iterative part. And as we usually do next week, we'll take some of those pieces and we'll further refine them. So there's a goal for this week, and then we'll have a similar goal for next week. The actual deliverable is going to be the sitemap, the basic wireframes that we're going to do this week, kind of the prototype wireframes, if you want to call them that. And the next week we'll call it a storyboard, where we see more of an idea of how people get to a desired outcome. So that also harkens back to maybe the first and second weeks, which is what is it you're trying to enable people to do? Many of you are still working on that, and that's fine, but we're getting toward the point where we do need to have something that people need to do with our data. If you're struggling with that, we do have, hopefully you guys are feeling good about Mural. One thing I can say for this week, we did do these site mapping exercises. I am not as crazy as many about using a program, only because we ran into the problem of, well, if you wanted to change something, you have to go back to the program, export it, upload it here. It does get a little bit like there's a little bit too much work. And many people just kind of stopped, said, here, I've put it on a piece of paper. In general, in this kind of work, we like to remain flexible, and we don't like to get to settle in on ownership of something. That's why we're keeping the fidelity fairly low, not to get married to a particular visualization and so forth. And maybe you'll understand, too, why we haven't started to sketch out or depict things yet. So in terms of the site maps, maybe one general comment is that site maps are a little bit old-fashioned. Basically, about 10 years ago or so, the web was able to update a page without getting a new page. So websites were, in fact, very page-based because you had to go from one page to the other, and sitemaps made sense because they were static. Once people figured out this thing called Ajax, and it's called a bunch of other things, now you can update a page with new information. You can actually do almost anything you want because the information can come in and the page itself does not have to go back to get another page. So that page-based metaphor isn't as popular. But the flow is, and how things are organized and the words you use. So all those things are still important. I did take a look, gave you all feedback. Hopefully you're feeling at least that you could get to the next step. So that next step, let me just show you. The module here actually has a couple of fairly elaborate videos of me walking through how to create wireframes. And to be clear, wireframes in my mind are also the same as sketches. They're fairly low fidelity, even though creating something like this that you'll see here might actually take a fair amount of skill. The actual outcome and the thing that you're looking at isn't about fine design. I do think it is important, I think in some ways, to do this computerized version rather than the sketch version. But if you're curious and you want to get feedback, sketching something out on paper and uploading that picture for feedback should be perfectly fine. I think as we get toward the end, there'll be so much repetition that you'll want the ability to copy and paste. So I'll let that sink in. Yeah, your elements, so to speak, really won't change a lot. They might move around a little bit. So copying and pasting becomes, sort of helpful. So yes, those videos might take a little while to watch and get used to. We're going to use a program called Figma. If you want to use another program, you can ask. Again, it doesn't really matter. The nice thing about Figma is, again, that feeling I can go in and look at your Figma. You'll have to sign up for this, but I do think Figma is a pretty cool thing. There's also a thing about Sketch if you don't have a Macintosh, if you believe Sketch also has a 30-day free trial. So if you want to use Sketch, it's fine. They're very, very similar. In fact, they almost have the same identical interface. Just one is online and one is a program you have to run. So yeah, that takes us to the exercises. So let's take a look at those. So the exercises for this week are pretty minimal because I think we're looking toward having a little understanding right now about the tools that you can use. So here's a few tools for no reason whatsoever, because as I said, I think Figma is the one to use. There are a lot of tools. I'm a little bit nuts about different tools, and you might not need to be. Again, we don't need distractions here. We're just trying to sketch something out. There's a really interesting article here about how to get started. You see this big post-it note. It's odd that it didn't come through nice and pretty like this one, which kind of bugged me for a while. But either way, these are the things that we're going to do. And one thing that's extremely important right now is that you are going to your wireframe is going to depict your HTML structure. So don't think that those are gone. In fact, that's kind of the goal for this week, is to take that HTML structure, create a wireframe that represents it, and then tweak both of them based on, seeing that there's some mismatch or something that you didn't quite think of. But the visuals come from the HTML. That's really the whole point. And here's where you can share your wireframes or sketches. And there's one more question here. It just has to do with, as you're depicting interaction, you'll start to probably think or be perhaps a little bit confused about what makes something clickable or actionable. So as you're doing a wireframe, very black and white, low fidelity, but you still need to know what is it that you can interact with and what you can't interact with. And I'll just say, in many respects, people are very into this button. There's a big box and it has a word in it. It's effective, but I think there are other ways. As you looked into navigation styles last week, you might have seen some clues as to what makes something interactive. So I'd like you to share a post-it with a style, and we can discuss. You can also put in an example if you wish. I think you do need to start to think about, how does a user know from your sketch or wireframe what they can do, what leads them to another place. And that being said, one final thing is, if we go back here, I'm looking for an example of each of the, let's call them pages in your sitemap. So it looks to me like people have settled around 5 or 10 or so. That's what we're looking for, and I think you're going to change your mind, which is fine. But I do think if you do have different pages, this is where we get into really showing examples. So many of you, I talked about, well, if you had a list of something, you have examples, how does that look to the user? So we're going to get into that this week. You're going to struggle or triumph, hopefully, with figuring out how that works. And that's where we'll take it from there. So as usual, post early in the week. We try to wrap everything up by Saturday. This will be a two-parter, so that, as I said, there's nothing due on this Sunday, but we'll continue to use your work throughout next week as we focus a little bit more on achieving a goal. But here it's really just take that HTML, put it into a picture or pictures, and also start to think about, how do you arrange things on a page? How do you indicate something that's actionable? How do you give examples of those actions? So a fair amount of work this week. I hope you'll enjoy it. Thank you so much.